de Benoît for you, probably, as my surname. Satanova really sounds in German quite devilish.
Well, lucky you, there are more languages out there than German, Olaf.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
Yeah,
just
good.
Okay. So, do you think we should start? Or, dear guests, could we wait a little bit, like 1 minute more, or we could start immediately? What do you think? Dear participant, raise your hands if we should start. Mhm. Thank you. Mm. Okay, let's start because we really we have our amount of time, so I think we cannot, waste it. Okay, so let me share with everyone my very short presentation. Okay. If everyone can see that. Okay. So, okay, no. Okay. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our today online workshop about Central Asian museum collection in Europe, in European museums. And so in recent years, cultural heritage and museum space stimulates the global growing interest among academia and global publics. But what's interesting that this attention and from the public, however, put into the center the questions about provenance, about ethics, and at the same time, Central Asian museum collection still remain understudied in the global museum space. And as shows my next slide, with this fantastic Bukhara carpet from the Harvard Museum collection, Central Asian objects are still misattributed, decontextualized, and sometimes not really well defined, which shows us that colonial approaches are still relevant to today's museum practices. So in today's workshop, we will discuss mostly how Central Asian collections studied, represented, and preserved in museums across Europe. And we have fantastic speakers today, and I'm really thankful to them for joining us, our workshop. We have 5 speakers from Bern Museum, from Ethnological Museum in Berlin, from Linden Museum in Stuttgart, from Sammlungen, Weltensammlungen in Lübeck. I'm sorry, Olaf, I hope I pronounced it correctly. And also from Weltmuseum in Vienna. And also, I would like to add that today's online workshop is actually based on our earlier initiatives, Bremen workshop in April and an online seminar in February, as well as on the Arts and Craft exhibition, which was held within CES conference in November 2019. And now, before we pass to our presentation, I would like to invite the public to send me in the chat box your questions, or you could raise your hands at the end of all presentation. And on this slide, you can see the names of our speakers in the order of their presentation. So, and now, all right, we could start, I believe. So, dear Rahel, are you ready? Please, the floor is yours. I'm sorry, if anyone hears anything, because I don't hear anything.
No, I don't hear anything.
Rahel?
Neither.
Rahel? Hello, Rahel.
We
Yes,
can't hear
talk-
you.
I'm talking.
Okay.
Are you
So,
hearing me now?
no, yes, totally.
You can hear me now?
Yes, totally.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for your kind invitation and for the seat at the virtual round table tonight. Over the next minutes, I would like to give you an insight into the still so-called Oriental collection at our museum here in Bern. I'm a curator at the History Museum in Bern, Switzerland, in the ethnographic, so-called ethnographic collection. Some of you are already familiar with the collection, while others are definitely not. So I will give a brief overview touching on the collector himself, his collecting practices, his publishing and exhibition activities, as well as the collection itself. Through my presentation, I hope it becomes clear why I consider these artifacts to be witnesses to a complex history. And at the end, I will also address some current questions that arise today when working with the collection. So, yes, no. Next slide. This is the very first object from Central Asia to arrive in Bern in 1883, before the History Museum had even opened. Henry Moser presented it to the president of the Swiss Confederation as an official gift from the Emir of Bukhara. The museum has kept it on deposit since its founding in 1894. Henry Moser himself was a Swiss personality born in St. Petersburg in 1844 as the son of a Swiss watch manufacturer. Between 1868 and 1889, he traveled through Central Asia a total of 4 times. You see him here on his first journey in the left picture, and later in a studio portrait taken in Switzerland after the third. During this third journey, Moser accompanied a Russian military delegation and met numerous high-ranking individuals. The Emir of Bukhara was just one of several figures who presented him with valuable gifts, weapons, textiles, jewelry, and more. These objects formed the foundation of his collecting activities. Here you see his travel route from his 4th journey. And on this map, you can see all of his 4 journeys, travel routes from all of his 4 journeys. Moses' travel writings were first published as articles in the Journal de Genève. Later, they were compiled into a book titled Through Central Asia, published in French and German. These publications contributed to his reputation as a travel writer and as an expert on Central Asia. Also, as he made his intention very clear in his own foreword, as you can read here. After returning to Europe, Moser became intensively involved in collector and art cycles, particularly in Paris. He systematically expanded his collection by purchasing objects on the art market. His ambition was clear: to assemble an outstanding collection of what was then referred to as Islamic or Oriental art. Like many collections of this period, it reflects about all the tastes, interests, and perspectives of the collector himself. The exhibition catalogue you see here on the left above, published in 1886, lists 561 objects. When Moser donated his collection to the museum in 1914, it had grown to a total of 3,373 items. At that time, objects from Persia formed the largest group, while weapons dominated as an object category, reflecting Moser's personal passion. He even published a dedicated catalogue on them, as you can see here as well. Time only allows me to highlight a few items, so I will focus on some from Central Asia, hoping that they give you an idea of the variety of the collection. The largest group of Central Asian material are a couple of 100 photographs that Moser either took or acquired during his travels. You see a few here on this slide. Moser also played a pioneering role in presenting Central Asia to a European audience. He exhibited parts of his collection at for example, at the International Geographical Congress in Geneva, 1886 and 1891, and in 1893 in Paris at the Palais Marigny and the Palais d'Industrie during the exhibition L'Art Musulman. Before donating his entire estate to the museum, he displayed it at his family estate, Charlottenfeld Castle in Schaffhausen, as you can see here. His exhibitions, as well as the collection itself, as I mentioned before, reflect not only his personal aesthetic preferences, but also his colonial perspectives and a commercial interest. These 2 wall hangings from representative Islamic tents are among the most distinctive objects in Moser's Central Asia collection. As you may have noticed in earlier exhibition photographs, Moser mainly used textiles as decorative backdrops rather than as objects of study in their own right. These 2 hangings were likely acquired on the art market since they do not appear in Moser's earliest catalogues. They already appeared in the first design sketches for the museum's exhibition, therefore. On the left, you see a draft plan showing their intended placement above the doorways, and on the right are historical photographs from 1922 showing the realized display in the newly opened so-called Musée Moser. In the museum's yearbook of 1922, the curator described them as large silk and velvet hangings of noble Kyrgyz tents. Later, they were published as unique Kazakh artifacts. However, comparable examples from other museum collections suggest that one of these, the hangings, is more likely to originate from North Africa, while wall hangings from the Central Asian region primarily came from textile centers such as Bukhara. These objects therefore challenged their early ethnographic classifications and demonstrate that careful research requires multiple perspectives. If we want to find out more about the artifacts, we must not only examine materials and techniques and research comparable objects, but have to ask critical questions about their circulation and appropriation in different contexts, as well as about their transformation in museums over the course of the collection's history. The exhibition of the collection at the museum has undergone many changes over the last more than 100 years. Most recently, we added 4 new stations that also critically examine the Orientalist framework. I warmly invite you to visit our website for further information, and please do not hesitate to contact me for questions about the collection or related archival materials. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rahel. So we will ask a question later. And now our next speaker is Melanie, ethnologist and curator from Ethnological Museum in Berlin. Melanie, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, it's good now. Yeah, as Susanna said, I'm the curator of the North Africa, West and Central Asian Department in Ethnologisches Museum Berlin. The department holds more or less 26,000 objects, approximately half of them from Central Asia. Roughly, we can assume there are 6,000 objects coming from Uzbek, Turkmen, and Tajik groups living in what was Russian West Turkestan and the Emirate of Bukhara in the late 19th century, as well as from these groups living in Afghanistan in the second half of the 20th century. Unfortunately, this is as exactly as we can get when it comes to estimation of numbers. Not because we don't know where the objects come from, we usually have the information on paper, but in terms of geography, our database was seriously neglected for the last years. Today, I will focus on 2 of our collectors from West Turkestan. The first one is Willy Rikmas, who collected from 1849 to 1914, mostly in the Emirate of Bukhara, not just in the city, but in the eastern mountainous regions of Western Pamir. He collected far more than the bit over 1,000 objects we have in our collection today. Some went to other museums, some got lost during transport or in customs, and there's also a significant amount of objects lost during World War II. While Rikmas' collection is not the oldest Berlin Museum holds from Central Asia, it is the first one we have more information than just the basic name of the collector. Rikmas left to the museum various travel accounts and letters where he described the objects he bought, as well as his approaches to collecting. He was not an anthropologist, but independent, wealthy, and mostly interested in climbing mountains and developing business ideas in mountainous regions, which usually failed. His collections were mostly bought through local merchants, while he tried to find additional information on origin of many objects. We mainly end up with bought in Bukhara. This makes it sometimes even questionable whether these objects were ever produced for being used or ever used, or whether they were already products for the growing collector market in Central Asia in this time. Rickmer's collecting was driven by two ideas characterizing the museum ethnology and the approach towards material culture in the late 19th century. First, German nation-building project of this time, when the newly founded Museum for Völkerkunde in Berlin needed the same objects as other museums across Europe. As Germany started late into the colonial project, it was also late in terms of collecting exotic objects from all over the world. Or, as Rickmers wrote, I quote, "The Ottoman Empire and North Africa are already sold out. Luckily, Central Asia, freshly conquered by Russia, still hold possibilities to acquire Oriental treasures. But as Rickmers also often wrote, we have to buy now. Paris and St. Petersburg are already here." This comes frequently up in his letters whenever he requests for money, and usually he was successful. The second idea is described today as salvage anthropology, the idea that European products would soon be sold everywhere and that truly authentic items would disappear or be recognizable too soon due to industrialization. It was therefore high time to rescue the last authentic objects by placing them in European archives of humanity. Together, both approaches led to a collection that says maybe more about the European idea of Oriental craft than about the rapidly changing society of Central Asia in this time. We have wonderful embroideries and carpets made with natural dyes and described as full of patterns with hidden meanings, but hardly any objects that show the different cultural exchanges before and especially during the end of the 19th century. And the Rickmers collection, and I'm sure this goes for other collections of this time, does not only reflect the Oriental views of the late 19th century, early 20th century, but also set the tone for further development of the collection in Berlin. When the North Africa, West and Central Asia Department, back then called Islamic Orient, was founded in 1970, there was clear that Berlin Museum will never have a complete archive of humanity from North Africa or West Asia, but that did not keep the first curators from aiming for a complete Central Asian, or better, Uzbek and Turkmen collection. Closing gaps in the collection was a leading idea, and this did not mean looking for contemporary, new, or hybrid objects, but to look for the missing pattern from 1900, which was still not in the collection. Many of these collections acquired in the 1970s and 1980s came through art dealers with all the provenance issues that are inherent in this market. But also we have the blessing that within these sometimes enormous convolutes of 800 objects at one time, we also find contemporary objects, souvenirs, not real masterpieces that give a hint on the craft developments in the 1960s to 1980s, especially in Afghanistan. This leads me to the second collector I want to introduce, not so famous as Rickmers. Helmut Klieber was, like Rickmers, a typical collector of his time. Born in 1927, he was a specialist on Oriental carpets and spent a lot of time and efforts in the 1960s and 1970s collecting carpets, especially in Iran and Afghanistan. He also traveled to what was back then Soviet Turkestan, as he called it, but of course, his collection from these parts are small. Nearly 2,400 objects from his collections. I have here 1,600 objects and nearly 800 pictures come to the museum between 2013 and 2016, partly as donation, partly bought. Most of them, if not all, were collected in Afghanistan in the 1970s. In contrast to Rickmers, Klieber sought his carpets outside the established markets and painstakingly documented his collections, the technique, the knots per square decimeter, and the patterns, comparing them with each other. This was more or less what museum researchers also did in this time. Publications like Caps of Central Asia or Bukharan metalwork explore stitches and chasings in a detail no craftsman would have ever dreamed of. Klieber also tried to find additional information on the carpets he bought. But in the preface of his book on Afghanistan, he admitted ethnological knowledge can no longer be presumed today. Much must remain hypothesis. Obviously, ethnological knowledge for him was knowledge on patterns and symbols, not about production processes, use of the objects, or anything related with the life of people producing the objects and trading them. He obviously spoke to producers, he did photography, documentary on them, but he did not consider them as informants for ethnological information. The reason to focus on Klieber is that even 50 years apart, the idea behind their collecting were pretty close. Both were led by the search of the real, authentic object, the one that was about to be extinct, or even was already extinct, but maybe still existing in some remote places where it was up to the European collector to recognize them and save them because the locals failed to see their value. Contemporary carpets or embroidery appear only in comparison to older masterpieces the collectors knew from museum collections. For example, Klieber, the carpet in this village are nearly as good as the old ones, or ancient qualities survived in this region. Or in Rickmers, in slightly disgusted side notes, today, of course, all good quality is lost. It seems as there was nothing worth collecting after the real Orient got in contact with the West. Today, European museums indeed work as archives of humanity when, for example, craftspeople and artists from all over the world come to discover the objects of their ancestors again in our archive. But for me, for museum workers, I also see the challenge of researching and presenting collections that are so closely linked to Western perceptions of the Orient, in this case Central Asia, for not repeating the same Orientalist stereotypes over and over again. It is not, as I also learned, very helpful that various players, from art dealers and collectors, who see the value of their collection increase to exhibitions, to embassies, which prefer to showcase past glories over contemporary realities, have their own interest not to challenge the established image of Central Asia. I end with two examples we tried over the last 3 years to work with intervention within our Islam Central Asia exhibition. This one here is just an installation in the making. It's a project I did together with 2 Uyghur colleagues. We traveled within the Uyghur diaspora in Turkey and Kazakhstan and did interviews with Uyghurs in the US, looking for what material culture means for Uyghur in the diaspora today. And the first intervention that comes now is from an Uyghur designer, artist. This is an Uyghur wall hanging from the 1980s, together with contemporary Uyghur t-shirts. And the other one, I showed it already in Bremen, is an infamous dust carpet, paradisos, a carpet woven from dust by an Italian-Iranian couple who tried to challenge the carpet myth this way, that they collected dust, mostly in our museum, and wove this carpet from it. So thanks for your attention to this short presentation.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for your presentation. It was very educational indeed. And now, please, Olaf, are you ready? Could you please join us and start your presentation? We cannot hear you, Olaf.
Sorry. Hopefully you can hear me now. Yeah. Okay. So I want to present something a little bit on Richard Carut's collection that he made in 3 journeys he did between 1903 and 1908, coming firstly along this very famous new colonial infrastructure called the Transcaucasian Railway. He started in Baku and ended in Kokand. The second journey in 1905 is quite understudied, so we have only very few information, and he does not wrote in bigger articles about that journey. But then second, third journey, 1908, is very well documented because he wrote a book that has this sounding title, Among Turkmen and Kyrgyz. When I will speak about Kyrgyz, I use the bird of Karut's that appears sometimes in the undertitle or in the captions of the pictures, but you know yourself that at that time the Kazakh were called as well as Kyrgyz in the Russian and European literature, and only afterwards got the Kazakh name into the literature. Okay, so along with the first journey, Richard Karutz actually traveled along a railway, and he was only obtaining things he could buy in Bukhara, Samarkand, Marv, in the bazaars. So he stopped in at addresses he collected before with friends. So in Bukhara, it was a German drug dealer who had a drug station or a drug shop in Bukhara Old Town, or the original Bukhara, not the new one in Kagan. And the Samarkand place where he rested was also private, so that was mostly it is a framework of this emerging colonial or established colonial infrastructure. At the third journey, he mostly went into the rural areas and lived or stayed in what he would call kibitka, not yurt, so the tent of the nomad population that he visited at that time between Mangischlag and Aral Sea. That was actually his main aim. So when he donated these items to the museum, he was at that time already the director of the museum, and these everyday items or the bazaar items became were elevated to exhibition stages, and they were displayed as something that would show authenticity, as Rahel was already saying, or Melanie. Also, at that time, all people had the motive to acquire things before things changed. So the industrialization period, of course, destroyed a lot of handicrafts and so on. And then, of course, he looked for a difference. And not to forget, Richard Karutz was a heavily racist person. So in his travel notes, we hear a lot of things that we wouldn't even reread loudly today. So so when we can look at this exhibition or exhibitions, or also the objects we have, we can do it with actually 3 lenses, and I will explore a little bit on that 3 lenses that we can maybe discuss afterwards. This is the lieu de mémoire from a French sociologist, Pierre Nora, then the site of cultural difference, also from the French Bourdieu, Darbel, and then the idea of coloniality from Walter Mignolo, that these 3 theorists are quite famous, and I just highlight only some points. Pierre Nora describes the lieu de mémoire as sites in which memory becomes materialized, places where the past is condensed, stored, or ritualized. In Lübeck, Karutz's objects became exactly that. They were material anchors of a distance elsewhere, condensed into vitrines, labeled and ordered into categories. They were not simply things, they became memory sites of a constructed Central Asia. Yet this memory was not in Central Asian memory, it was a European memory of Central Asia frozen at the moment, defined by imperial mobility and asymmetric knowledge extraction. The museum thus created a mnemonic landscape in which Central Asia appeared traditional, unchanging, and almost timeless. By framing these objects as authentic remnants, as a disappearing world, the museum actively shaped collective memory. These objects, lamps, carpet, metal bowls, and so on, became mnemonic proxies standing in for entire communities and life worlds that were neither presented nor represented, were neither present nor represented. So the sites of cultural difference is the second analytical lens we make use in our discussion later words. This is the idea that this people are learning how to see the different world. So people coming into the museum, they are taught by the museum curators that what is exotic, what is primitive, what is colorful, and what is unusual. So this is actually something that the curators are looking for and thinking the attraction of this exotism, colorfulness, and unusualness is something that the visitor would be interested in. And so that is a clear idea of othering. And the third idea is how colonial times maybe persist even after colonial administrations and colonial state were actual or were in a living state. So his idea is that people that benefited from the colonial times and that are writing about that in books and making exhibitions, they shape our idea of the world, and they use a colonial matrix of power. So they fix Central Asia in a framework defined by European observers, not by communities themselves. They reinforce a one-side narratives in which Europe spoke and Central Asia was spoken about. So now let's dive a little bit into the collection. This is a snapshot of the exhibition in 1929. So you see a tent, a horse, and a fireplace, I guess. And if you go into the picture, you would see here Kirgizen Kibitke. That would be the house of a Kyrgyz family. Interesting for me was that he's using the word kibitka and not yurt, because at that time, for us, it sounds a little bit old and a little bit unusual. Also, of course, yurt is a Russian colonial word, meaning in Central Asian languages, homeland, and not a tent or a house. We use for we use that word for. Then these are typical objects of the 1903 trip. So we see touristic items that have their original form, of course, from leather bags for water. And now here you see a stitching, very nicely made things for the bazaar, for the market, never used. There is no trace of any use at that. Also, the shoes here were actually bought newly from the market, and the lamp also has no traces of use as many other objects of that time. Then in 1908, the objects he brought with were mostly from the nomadic surroundings, or what he would call some nomadic. So interiors of the tents, then things that were part of the horse accessoires and gunpowder, bags like this. The next is some photographs. So the captures are not but what he wrote under the glass picture. So actually we don't see people here, we see a door in the center. That's very interesting, how perception of that time was different than what we actually would firstly see at a photo like this. Then we see a photograph from people that maybe showed some of their belongings. Maybe they arrived. We don't know really what happens. We only know that this is I would say, village where there are tents that stay for a longer time, that even have these barrels that you would not take with you if you are on a nomadic trip. And people that just came. And the next is Kyrgyz girls, that what he would call it. So we are in the middle of a tent village or a tent camp, where he also was working as doctor. So he was a medical specialist on ears, and where he also made some works with the people, so to have a reason to go into the rural areas. So what are we doing actually now? We want to decolonize these collections somehow with the help of people from Central Asia. And in this autumn, I was for several weeks in Uzbekistan and made some lectures to students of the University of Bukhara. And now we have 46 students of several courses that deal with objects we have in the collection. For that, we were putting up, I just show you to you a community app. I cannot show it on this computer because our city councilor IT team is very restrictive to us how we can use computers, because there is a commentary field for those who want to comment on these items. In Lübeck, commentary fields are not allowed.
I'm sorry, you have absolutely no time.
Yeah,
Absolutely no. I'm sorry, you should. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. This is actually my last slide. So if you want to dive into some of these objects that are already online, just use Divan at Community Museum, and then you find it on your smartphone or computer. So Snejana, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Olaf. So now let's move to our next speaker. Dear Hanin, are you ready?
Yes, thank you. I hope you can see my screen and you can hear me. Yes?
Yes, totally.
Okay, perfect. First of all, I would like to start by thanking you, Dr. Snejana Atanova, for your kind invitation to be part of this panel. I am delighted to be here today and to share with you my research results about the photography collection centering East Asia at Weltmuseum Wien. I would also like to thank Daniel from IT for making sure that the technical aspects of this panel work. So thank you both very much. This talk presents the history of the photographic collection of Weltmuseum Wien in Vienna, Austria, the former Museum of Ethnology, and focuses on images pertaining to Central Asia, and most notably what is today Turkmenistan. It disregards the visual productions of ethnologists and anthropologists from the global north. And what I will do instead is to center photographers from the global south specifically those operating in and are from Central Asia around 1900. In doing so, my research method is to interpret the photography collection against the grain, to reiterate Laura Stoller's theory about this interpretative possibility. Against the grain in this case means against the centrality of European photographers to the history of photography, and for local protagonists from Central Asia. This act demonstrates how the very structure and organization of the photography collection in an ethnology museum, a museum which was used to perpetuate colonial power asymmetries, can also be used to subvert these dynamics and these power asymmetries. When Franz Heger, who was the first director of Weltmuseum Wien, previously known as the Anthropologisch-Ethnographischen Abteilung des K&K Naturhistorischen Hofmuseums, try saying that 5 times in a row, traveled to the Caucasian region and to Russian Turkestan between 1881 and 1893, Franz Heger purchased several artifacts, as well as 92 photographs while on his trip, and he purchased them for the museum, for the Weltmuseum Wien. When looking at these holdings, I do not consider Franz Heger to be the central protagonist in this transaction, because he purchased photographs from local people. So there is someone on the other end who sold him the photographs. The question is, who was the photographer? And why is the name of the photographer not included in the historical inventory of the museum? Why? Because an inventory book as a primary material is a historical document that reflects institutional biases that have helped push forward certain historical actors, such as Franz Heger, and silence others, like Alexander Karlovich Engel, whom I will address in a second. In fact, buried in Franz Heger's collection is the photographer and landscape painter Alexander Karlovich Engel. Engel was active in Central Asia and Northern Caucasus, and he had his own photo studio. In 1879, Engel received the silver medal at the St. Petersburg Geographical Society, and in 1881, the diploma of the International Congress of Geographers. In 1890, Engel opened his own photo studio in Tbilisi. At least that's the one that we know about. And 5 years later, he opened another photolithographic studio. Starting 1896, Engel worked as the photographer on the Transcaucasian Railway and published the photo album Railways of Caspian Land. So Engel either met Heger, or Heger ordered some of Engel's photos to be delivered to him anywhere in Central Asia, because there is no primary source proving that Engel sent any letter to the museum. So the photographs were not delivered to the museum. And so they met, or Heger ordered some of his photos to be delivered to him in Central Asia. And part of the photographs is also this and several other images of Bukhara and what is today Uzbekistan. So we see Turkmen people before and now Uzbekistan. So in centering Engel's photographic oeuvre, I help shift photography collections in ethnological museums away from being the brainchild of European explorers, a most fraught term, to a site where the production of local photographers can come to the fore. Moreover, ethnologist Josef Troll, who is a representative of Vienna's wealthy bourgeoisie and a self-proclaimed globetrotter, I mean, of course, he didn't use this word, but today we would say that he considered himself a globetrotter, also visited Central Asia several times. Uzbekistan between 1884 and 92, and Russian and Chinese Turkestan in 1888-89. Josef Troll brought back around 1,100 ethnographic objects and numerous photographs with him, which swayed the museum's collection towards Tajik handicrafts and plenty of Central Asian photos. So a cornerstone of the photo collection are the holdings by and attributed to photographer W. Orden or M. Hordet from the 1880s, 1890s. So a time of significant political and social changes as European powers and the Russian Empire tried to expand their influence into the region. So this is one of the photographs that I'm currently researching for an exhibition I'm curating about arms trafficking around 1900 and its relationship to the museum. I was very much interested in the rifle, which you see here, which is a Berdan 2 rifle. So if anyone has this rifle in their collection or at their museum, please let me know. Perhaps you could loan it to me for my, as of next year, like for September. So just, letting you know, just in case. So although the identity of the photographer behind the name W. Orden or M. Hordet remains somewhat mysterious due to the variations in this name, he or she or they apparently had multiple identities. We know that they used at least 2 languages, French and German, which you can see in some of the photos that are part of the collection of Orden at the Weltmuseum Wien. So there is ongoing research by photography historians who specialize in Central Asia to figure out who is this person. And there are various theories, which I would summarize as following. Some claim that W. Orden was a person. So there is a photographer. Some claim that W. Orden refers to a photo studio, so it's kind of a brand name. And some argue that W. Orden was a global image production agency that sold photographs of Central Asia worldwide, so eine globale Bildagentur. And we don't really know because the primary sources about Orden are very scarce. And so this practice of contemporary photographers working in commercial photography studios around 1900 was common. So there is some truth to this argument. Be it as it may, W. Orden remains a significant protagonist in the history of photography in Central Asia and the history of photography as such, one that cannot be limited to European collectors. I would argue that we cannot really decolonize any kind of collection by focusing on white Europeans who collected the artifacts. That is just my view, and I do apply it to the history of photography. Hence, my against the grain strategy helps shift the focus in the history of photography, which is traditionally a very Eurocentric field, to the global south by exploring photographic hubs such as what is today Turkmenistan, Bukhara, Tbilisi, etc., all around 1900. These spaces were characterized by continuous migrations in all directions, enabled by the Trans-Caspian Railway, whose construction began in 1879. So this critical infrastructure facilitated the circulation of people, of photographs, of photographic equipment as well, which were bought and sold on the international market, thus leading to an intense cultural, artistic, and scientific exchange. To conclude, my research seeks to turn the historical and epistemological asymmetries embedded in the photo collection on their head by putting them in the service of a more inclusive history of photography, which, guess what, is not only made of European photographers. I am writing this history through and despite the presence of such photos by Alexander Engel and W. Orden in an ethnographic collection meant to erase the agency and the creative genius of photographers, artists, and scientists from the global south. In doing so, the photography collection of Weltmuseum Wien, I hope, becomes a space for decentered histories and epistemic pluralities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Hanin. It was laconic and very intensive, and I don't have any rifle in my collection, But I can send you a few Turkmen proverbs about the weapons, and I
Yes,
think it
please.
would be very convenient for your exhibition.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Good. So, and now we have our final and brilliant speaker, Annette. Dr. Annette Kramer, please.
Okay, I try. Can you see that? You see my presentation? Okay, great. Yes, so hello to everybody and thank you for being here and thank you, Snejana, for inviting. I am happy to talk to you today about the Central Asian collections of the Linden Museum here in Stuttgart, from where I am speaking. I prepared for you some slides with much more text and more images than I will be able to refer to during my speech, in order for you, as you are all multitasking, to listen to my speech and to have a look at images and read a little bit more of the content prepared for you. The Linden Museum is quite famous for its Central Asian collections and for one exhibition, for the exhibition Heirs to the Silk Road, Uzbekistan, in the year 1995, which, by the way, is the reason why I am here, because when the position was advertised in 2005, I, of course, knew as a specialist of Uzbekistan and Central Asia about this book and about the Linden Museum and about the exhibition. And as I'm a native of Baden-Württemberg, I said, well, that's my job and I'm happy that I can be here. Yes, but if it's true that we have really rich collections, it is also true that early collections, so we talked about it from the end of the 19th or beginning of the 20th century, deliver only a fragmentary basis for what is there now. And that is due to the fact that the Linden Museum, or what was before the collection efforts of the Württemberg Association for Commercial Geography, was focused on regions of interest, colonial interest or economical interest, and among these regions was not Central Asia. However, the chairman of this association, Karl Graf von Linden, he was nevertheless ambitious to create a real museum with, let's say, worldwide collections. He was really passionate about it and therefore was addressed by collectors and travelers for some collections from Central Asia, and that was the reason why we acquired about 250 objects from Islamic Central Asia with these early collections. However, only 1/5 is still in the museum storages, which is neglectable, I would say. I have to mention, however, that in the archive, the citations about collecting are so similar to what we have already heard from in the speeches up to now. And I, just as a visual impression, I here present a few objects of the Rikmas collection, of whom we have already heard today. The real focus came after 1960s with the project of the Stuttgart-Badachschan expedition in 1962 and 1963. And that was due to Friedrich Kussmaul, the later director and then curator of the Asian department at the Linden Museum. He had done his theoretical PhD on nomads of Inner Asia and was eager to travel himself and to collect for the Linden Museum. So with this undertaking, a very big collection came to Stuttgart, and it was actually the biggest expedition of the Linden Museum ever. In my department, this collection is the biggest collection in terms of numbers. It is 1,000 objects, but what is so important is that these objects are, well, enriched or let's say complemented by several thousands of photos, 30 films about technology, and also audio recordings about music, plus field notes. And, in this collection, is so much information, and also information which allows to decolonize the collection, because we learn to know former owners, people who produced objects or who helped in acquiring. And in an exhibition last year, we put them to the forefront. So a very big collection, and I'm grateful for it. It's really rich. But on the other hand, we have to say that this undertaking was still, let's say, in colonial legacy, even in Nazi legacy for some approaches. And in the end, it were 3 white men, brave men, if you have a look at the newspaper coverage, discovering foreign and dangerous and cold Badachshan. So the expedition I would judge as in between old style expedition and modern or more contemporary anthropological work. Collecting then went to a further step after 1973, when the Linden Museum became a state museum, which was again an idea of Friedrich Kussmaul, who then became the director, and he had the idea of transforming the Linden Museum as a pure ethnographic museum towards a cultural historical institution with objects from the distant past up to the present, with masterpieces of craftspeopleship or even art in the collections and exhibitions. And for that, he needed money, objects, and by the way, the museum was almost broke in private ownership. And he also needed space for exhibitions, and he managed. So with contract in October 1973, the Linden Museum became a state museum and got access to the state art funds, which is an impressive amount of money, enabling also my predecessor in my department to acquire thousands of objects via the art market from art dealers. Well, UNESCO convention, we all know about it. I don't want to now invest time in talking about that. Yes, and so as a state museum, there was the opportunity to create new departments, like my department, to create new exhibitions, and that was prepared in the 1970s and 1980s for the opening of several permanent exhibitions in the museum, among them the exhibition on the Islamic Orient. And one smaller exhibition, Arts and Crafts from Turkestan, is the English title of this exhibition, Aus Steppe und Oase, presenting Central Asian objects in a time, that's important, when Afghanistan had become less accessible for travelers, and the Soviet Union still being not accessible for Western German travelers. So it was again an exhibition of the distant, other and foreign. Please have a look at some big acquisitions, very expansive acquisitions as well. We come back to the lampstand in 2 minutes. And that is the permanent exhibition with architectural elements in it and not so much only showcases with small objects. So we are now in the 1990s, which witness the independencies of the stance of Central Asia, of the former Soviet Union. And of course, the Linden Museum's Islamic Orient department with my predecessor, Johannes Kalter, would have been interested anyway in exhibiting the Silk Road or Uzbekistan. But the idea for this important exhibition was not brought on the floor by the Linden Museum itself. And that is very interesting, and I found it only in the archive. It was a representative of the Daimler-Benz AG approaching my predecessor in 1993, asking, what material do you have? We are interested in becoming active in Central Asia and also interested in promoting cultural cooperation as a PR tool, most probably. So the whole idea to prepare a huge exhibition with the subtitle Uzbekistan was a Daimler-Benz initiative. Well, the Linden Museum said thank you, and if I critically ask myself, I would have said thank you as well, most probably. And in a very fast time, very quickly, this whole thing was prepared with acquisition of new ethnographic objects from Uzbekistan also. These were state art funds, with great architecture, with loans from Uzbekistan, transport codes, Daimler-Benz AG, of course, and a catalogue in 3 languages, among it so many copies of the Russian version distributed in Uzbekistan by institutions of Germany. So a big project planned by Daimler's marketing department on a very high level. And also politics came in because it was discussed and decided that the opening would be combined with political meetings about economic cooperation afterwards. So what we will see now was only the start. Islam Karimov had official talks with the federal organs, and there were also economic contacts launched in the context of the opening of this exhibition. And I find it so interesting that the opening was tomorrow, 30 years ago. So we have a kind of strange anniversary to celebrate. Yes, and see Islam Karimov opening, Linden Museum written smaller, Daimler-Benz written bigger, in the hall of the Linden Museum. Roman Herzog, federal president, also the head of Daimler, no photo here. I was delighted to discover Yalla, that they performed in the Linden Museum. I didn't know before finding this archival material, and dancers, of course. So a very special opening 30 years ago with an exhibition which is still known because the catalogue is there and the catalogue is known. And let's come to this catalogue because I discovered a very strange change in attribution of several objects. And one example is here. You had seen the lampstand 2 minutes before. This lampstand was also shown in the exhibition of 1993, Gardens of Islam. And there it was attributed to Afghanistan, which I think is true, frankly speaking, and more to the 12th century, which also I think is more probable. 2 years later, the one and the same object became not just Transoxanian, but even Bukharan. So in the Uzbekistan catalogue, this object from Afghanistan was labeled to be from Bukhara. We did a research project on Khurasan with Behruz Kurbanov and Kurosh Rashidi working on it, and there is only one comparable object in a British collection. This is mentioned in the texts, and that is also an object with provenance on the art market. So no real provenance available and no real reason to say that this is Bukharan. Very strange. And maybe it was just happiness that a person said, well, this might be Bukharan, that people decided to put this label. But I suspect another aspect, that it was just appropriate to label it Bukharan. And this is for me really a reminder and a lesson learned that we as museum scientists should be extremely careful in attributing, or whenever we speak, whenever we publish, to be very careful and authentic in our texts. Otherwise, it becomes highly problematic. And well, I think we can discuss what I want to talk about right now later in our discussion, but let me mention by summarizing that what I was talking about is, Hanin, is of course economic interests, political interests, interests for a specific audience, which some decades ago was really more, let's say, bio-German, a white expedition. This is not the way we work at museums today. And we had examples of changes and new projects in the other speeches. And so are we doing, we of course pursue new approaches in museum work. And one big project since 2019 is our working group created on the basis of an open call, Entangled Stuttgart, Afghanistan, which led to the big exhibition last year, where we also showed many, many objects, which were also presented in the so-called Uzbekistan exhibition, because it's Central Asia and not Uzbekistan, and also not necessarily Bukhara. Often we do not know. Well, and we want to work with people, not necessarily with the other. We can discuss it. I find it very problematic to invite people, oh, you're from Afghanistan, so do you want to join us? But we pursue open calls, or want to pursue open calls in order to invite everybody interested to really create multivocality, multi-perspectivity, and to resist single storytelling. This is our call from 2019. And the Entangle Group is still there, still eager to work. Unfortunately, financial means are limited. So I don't know how we are going on with them, but they want at least to organize events. And this is a part of the exhibition. I don't want to talk about it right now. We can, if you are interested in it, discuss it later. We created last year a multi-layered exhibition with the help of graphic designers, where people could themselves decide if they want to walk through and see beautiful objects. This is possible. Or if they want to learn more about provenance, or if they want to listen to personal stories by members of the Entangled group like Jamil, who visited shrines in Ghazni. If we want to come in touch with them and maybe become part of the whole Entangled project, which I maybe want to broaden, involving other regions and not only Afghanistan. Yes, so that's my input. Sorry for rushing through, and I hope it was understandable. And I'm eager to discuss in the workshop. And thanks again to Snejana.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dianet. I have a question for everyone. And so let me start with our first speaker, with Rahel. Okay, and then I will give the floor to our dear public. So Rahel, I remember when we had a talk about Henri Moser about a week ago, I guess. You shared very interesting information about him, that he was kind of eccentric person who surprised burn people, burn inhabitants with his Central Asian clothes. And so I'm wondering, and there was also kind of caricature in the local newspaper, right? So I'm really interested, what do you personally think about that? If it could be that his obsession with Central Asian clothes could be related to his interest in Orientalization, exotization of Central Asia, or he was really connected to Central Asian culture, and he was really interested in wearing these kind of clothes. Next question for Melanie. Melanie, I know I terrorized you a lot with your exhibition, a permanent exhibition at Humboldt Forum. Do you think there will be any changes in this exhibition soon? I mean, permanent Central Asian exhibition. That's all question. And now for Olaf. Olaf, I'm really very interested in these photographs you showed us. Because I had so many ideas in mind about the object in some Gara yurt photo and in another one. So it would be nice if you could share them. And also my question is, do you know if Richard Carut's collection have ever been exhibited in full? Question for Hanin. Also, I terrorized you with photographs from Museum collection, I remember. Could you please tell me if there are any plans to digitalize the whole Weltmuseum photographic collection?
Already been digitized. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I will reply later. Sorry.
Okay. And Annette, thank you very much for my personal thanks for the photo of Yalla. I love this musical band. And could you also tell me your ideas about, okay, there was Johannes Kalter, a real figure in the Central Asian material culture, who made his research in Afghanistan in Soviet times, I mean, in terms of existence of Soviet Union. And at the same time, there was Wolfgang König on another side of Berlin Wall. And Wolfgang König, he actually provided his research in Soviet Turkmenistan. There were two researchers by two borders from Turkmenistan, in Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, and there were also two German researchers at the same period of time, almost at the same period of time, who were located ideologically and geographically within, by two opposite sides from the Berlin Wall. So what do you think about that? And it's interesting, Carter cited Wolfgang König, and I didn't find any citation of Johannes Kalter in the book, but in publication. It's a very interesting question, I think. And I'm sorry, I'm shut up now. So, yeah.
So how we go? Like, do I have to answer first? Yeah. I mean, to your question about the personality of Moser, I think I made it quite clear also through my presentation today that all his activities were driven mostly by his personal interest and his goal, his aim, his main goal was his own legacy, and he stated it quite early in his life that his main goal was to become rich and famous. So yeah, in a way, he became a collector by accident and through interacting in these circles, and this is also not very unique, because I mean, you probably I remember we also had this point with Tobias Mörike, and Hanin can probably also agree on the personalities present in the Weltmuseum Wien collection, that this was a certain kind of habitus or man's planning, or however you want to call it. But yes, what this finding I shared with you a few weeks ago about this caricature is very interesting, that he was known as that here in Switzerland, in his hometown, and the local newspaper at that time, or a more critical, let's say, local newspaper published this caricature. So there was critique already at his time, and this is something throughout hundreds years was not much mentioned or focused on. So it gives us also a more complex view of his time, that it was not only him and his companies, but there were already different perspectives. So yeah. And I mean, I also showed the picture, the studio portrait he made after he came back from his third travel in a photo studio at his hometown. And this is not the only one in the collection. There are numerous pictures showing him in a costume combining Asian, Oriental accessoires with European, and also a lot of weapons and stuff. So this was a way he liked to present himself, and yeah, this was him. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Melanie.
Yeah, for changes in the permanent exhibition in Humboldt Forum, no, there will be no changes. One and foremost, you need a bulldozer to change anything there. The exhibition architecture is so immobile, it's impossible to change things. It's a big problem, but it is like it is. Second, I don't know whether everybody here knows this permanent exhibition. It's not mine. I inherited it. But I think even if the main question is a bit to show Central Asian crafts as a part of the nation building process during the 20th century. This goes for Turkmen carpets, for Uzbek, Tajik/Tajik ceramics in Susani, and also for our small Kyrgyz collection. And the Uyghur is a bit of a special case. And I think even if I don't like the overall question because it feels a bit like 1990s, it's not the worst idea to exhibit these objects without falling into these Orientalist traps, and to have all these, oh, this is a deeper meaning, and so these carpet collector dreams. This is a big danger in our exhibition, and I'm happy that it is avoided there. So for me, I can live with it. There will be smaller changes over the next years because we have more than enough Turkmen carpets to display them in open air for the next 20 years. But for Uyghur and Kyrgyz objects, we are running out of objects because we have to change a lot. It's open, it's not in showcases, and the restaurators usually say we have to change every 8 months. Completely crazy, we change every 1.5 years. But even then, there will be contemporary exhibitions on contemporary art, on culture, crafts. We start now with what I showed, this first Uyghur project, and there are 3 other Uyghur designs for the next 5 to 6 years. And we will start with Kyrgyz artists soon. But yeah, but this will be temporary, 1 year maybe, to include contemporary arts and crafts.
Okay.
Usually rather arts than crafts.
Okay.
Because actually what we got there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Olaf.
I don't know about the number of objects that were shown in 1921, but I guess they were mostly shown because Richard Karutz was very, very proud of his collection. So that was a time when most of these items were on display. Then there was an exhibition that was called From Yurts and Bazaars in '88. So it was about the Soviet Central Asia, and there are actually 4 photographs in our documentation, and here we can see many things from Richard Howard's collection, but I don't know if that were all. But between 19, let's say 03 and 1988, around 12 to 14 people that collected in Central Asia gave their items to the collections. So I think in the bazaars and the Soviet Uzbekistan exhibition in 88, most items of Harrods were displaced. We don't have in the museum anymore since roughly 10 years. So since then, they were never displayed anymore. But from March to November, around 80 objects of the collections of Harrods collection are on display in St. Anne Museum in Lübeck. So I all invite you to come to this exhibition.
Thank you very much, Olaf. Thank you very much. We are looking forward to this exhibition, really. You know that how I really would like to see this collection, just face to objects, you know. Yeah. Hanin, you already started to tell about yes, please. Sorry.
No, I am very happy to say that I have inherited a photography collection that has been mostly digitized, so up to 96% is in a database with somewhat good information. I mean, of course, some photographs, there are more information about them, some photographs, there is less information. But the issue that I think you were addressing is the fact, what is online? And so what I put online are usually photographs that I think are less ethically fraught than the rest. I mean, of course, it's all ethically fraught because, you know, it's the legacy of colonialism and imperialism. But still, so what you find in our online database are the objects that, in my opinion, are less ethically fraught. Or photographs that I have extensively researched. So I have information to provide the website visitors with. And or that I have published about. So I don't just want to fill, because of the structure of our online databases is such that it's just a Schaufenster. So it's like a vitrine where you have a lot of photographs and images of objects, but they're not really organized in any way that is scientific. And we have an upcoming project to redo the website of the museum and focus more on creating a digital scientific infrastructure where I would then isolate, let's say, the photographs by W. Orden or by Alexander Karlovich Engel and present them as the highlights of the collection that they are, so that I could curate the content a bit more. But in terms of digitization and like registering the collection, its presence in the database, I have to give my colleague Manfred Kaufmann the credit he deserves for having spent 30 years doing just this and just with photographs. God bless him. So yeah, I have inherited a collection in a good condition. Now it's just time to move it online.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Hanin. Annette, and you have my question and one more question from our public.
Yes, your question, the relation, well, Wolfgang König and Johannes Kalter, I would say, I'm sure there was a relation, but Johannes Kalter was not a researcher, and that I do not want to, yeah, do not want to blame him because he never insisted on being a researcher. He traveled to Central Asia, to Afghanistan first, but not knowing any language and always working with translators. And his interest was more collecting. So I would label him a collector and not a researcher. For information, he collaborated with academics like, for example, Heinz Gaube, professor of Islamic art and Iranian studies in Tübingen. And he always invited many students to help him reading the inscriptions in objects. So he was not a researcher, but a collector. And as a collector, he read Wolfgang König, but Wolfgang König was only able to cite catalogs. And there was no real research work by Johannes Kalter about Central Asia. So that's the whole thing. It's really different. And in the history of the Linden Museum's collections, there is one researcher which I would to put to the forefront, even if he was working for the University of Mainz and later for the South Asian Institute of Heidelberg in Kabul. And that was Peter Snoy, who was a real good researcher. And he managed to learn Munji, not only Persian, and he managed to study Russian. And he traveled from Western Germany to congresses in the Soviet Union. And he was in contact with academics, Russian or Central Asian academics publishing in Russian language. And we have in the books he donated to the Linden Museum, his legacy is with us. We often have, greetings in Russian by the scholars. So there were exchanges and relations between East and West. And for example, I noticed that for Badakhshani Pamir studies, also an article of Friedrich Kussmaul about Afghanistan's Badakhshan was taken into account. So it was not an iron curtain in the field of science. It was quite open if people were able linguistically and ready to be in touch. Well, I don't know if that is convincing as an answer. Okay, and the second question, maybe Dilnoza, thank you for writing. I don't know if you were present during the whole of my presentation, because the photographs are not from Bukhara Museum, but from Linden Museum in Stuttgart, Germany. But I presented objects with an attribution to Bukhara. And of course, yes, we as a museum and I myself, I am in contact with people from Uzbekistan, and in the Khurasan research project from 2014 to 2017, we had invited Behruz Kurbanov from Bukhara, who did his PhD in Bamberg, and he worked with us during 3 years, and he was the one who noticed that objects attributed to Bukhara in the Uzbekistan catalog were most probably not from Bukhara. And he also discovered, together with archaeometrical analysis, which we did, that one object published in the Uzbekistan catalog was not only not from Bukhara, but a fake, a new production during the last 100 years. However, he discovered, and he told me, that a creative metalworker in the bazaar of Bukhara now creates bowls in the shape of the Linden Museum bowl, labeling it as being made in typical Bukharan style. And this is again an example of the very dangerous definition power of museum catalogs. Yes, but Dilnoza, thanks so much for being interested, and you can address me via email, for example, and we can
Thank you very
be
much.
in touch.
Yeah, it's interesting to
Yeah.
Sizga ham rahmat. Yes, you are right. Then I heard your presentation from middle, but it was so interesting for me. Even I'm historian. I heard in other sections, and I heard the last part of your presentation. It was so great honor to me to know about Bukharan information, because Behruz is my classmate in Bukhara. Yeah, we graduated our bachelor degree together.
Okay.
And yeah, I know him personally, actually. Then thank you very much for it was so a great pleasure for me to know suddenly about my city, my country. It is so, yeah, was interesting for me. Thank you very much. And it's so great pleasure to know you.
Thank you, for me as well.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So I'm glad, Annette, that your presentation has so much discussions, and really I'm thankful for your, for clarification of your point regarding Johannes Kalter and Wolfgang König. But you know what's interesting? I'm sorry, I just would like to finish my thought about that.
Okay.
There is a very interesting resource about German anthropologists.
Yeah, the online database.
Right.
Yes,
And you know what's interesting?
Yeah.
Wolfgang König is not presented among German anthropologists, and I'm always asking why. Because
So
in my
yeah.
opinion, in my humble opinion, his work about Turkmen Gesellschaft, it's really brilliant. And it's really based on his research in Turkmen society during his trip to Turkmenistan, you know. So I'm always asking why. Yeah, so that's it. And yeah.
You are right. He is the researcher, and Johannes Kalter was not a researcher. And well, you have to address the Ruhr-Universität Bochum, but I think that the author of this German anthropology encyclopedia maybe is not active anymore. But you are, of course, you're correct. He deserves to be present. Who knows why? I'm sorry, I'm not responsible. But you're right. Wolfgang König was a researcher.
No, I mean, I do not accuse
Important one.
anyone. I do not accuse anyone. I just
No, but you're right. And if that was a kind of Wikipedia style undertaking, then you, for example, or everybody else could participate in enriching this database, which might be good.
my German is not good enough for doing that.
I think it's bilingual, isn't it, in German and English?
In English, yes.
Yeah.
English too. And so we have more
Right,
4 minutes for actually we are really in time. Dear public, if you have any question, please raise your hands because I totally occupied all time, I think, with all my unstoppable questions and comments.
Does anyone have the Berdan 2 rifle in their collections that I'm looking for? Please. No, because it is the premise of my exhibition that although various communities from the global south used quite sophisticated firearms. Sorry, I'm looking at my cat. She's destroying my flat. It doesn't matter. Yeah, she might jump on the table. Just sorry. No. Although various communities from the global south used quite sophisticated firearms to fight off colonialist powers and to fight one another, ethnological museums rarely collected these very sophisticated firearms, focusing instead on bows and arrows and things like that. So,
I mean, like I mentioned, Hanin, the weapons collection of Henry Moser is quite big, and I've never dived into it because I decided not weapons would be my research focus. But I mean,
now is the time.
Yeah, we can get in touch, and I can at least send you a list, and you can, if you are kind of an expert, you can tell me if we have one like this. Maybe we are lucky, and he collected, because I mean he collected weapons.
I really love that.
And got weapons as presents, like I mentioned, as well. So could be, I don't know.
I mean, this one is really fascinating because a American inventor created it and sold it to the Russian Empire, and it ended up in Central Asia. So it has a very interesting global history, like a lot of weapons did and do until today. But I'm often kind of surprised. I mean, not surprised because I've been in ethnological museums for a while now, so I'm not surprised by anything. But I find it interesting that this approach to war kind of postulates that, you know, native people did not have access to sophisticated firearms. They didn't know what they were doing. They only had bows and arrows, which we know from historical record and historical photographs is simply not true. And they also invented their own. So I think, Melanie, you wanted to say something?
I mean, I can also have a look too, but we hardly have any weapons, not even bows and arrows, actually.
That is fascinating. Why do you think that is? Because there was war in the region. I mean, the British-Afghan War, so there was quite a lot of war. I mean, for the time, sophisticated firearms were used, like the one I showed is a bolt-action rifle. So
in general, have not many objects really connected with everyday life, with life of people. We have a collection that really focuses on beautiful textiles. I mean,
Okay,
so we hardly have any agricultural tools. We have hardly any tools you need to do all these wonderful crafts they collected, but we have a collection that is more close, well, at least for the 19th century, we have a collection closer to an Islamic art museum than ethnographic museum, at least from the Emirate of Bukhara. It's totally different for Xinjiang, for East Turkestan, for parts of Afghanistan, for Pamir, but for classical Central Asia, West Turkestan, it's
fascinating, really fascinating.
Not ethnological in a normal sense, anyway.
Aha, fascinating.
That's I think we should make another roundtable about
Yes.
weapons and rifles.
I
And
mean, Olaf and I already spoke about guns in the chat.
and
so
I saw your actual dialogue, and I think you should make something together with Rahel, with Melanie, Olaf, and also Annette. I think
all
she
of
would be
us.
excited to join. Yeah, and I think we at this note we could close our discussion. And yeah, so I'm looking forward for our next meeting.
Me too.
Yes.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone for your wonderful presentation. I really mean it. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for CES for supporting our today's online roundtable. And thank you very much for our audience for the question. And so see you soon.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Rahel, ich schicke dir eine Nachricht am Montag. Ich freue mich. Danke. Super. Ciao. Danke.
Ciao.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.